Awesome. Thank you guys for coming. So we're going to get started, and I would like to begin by recognizing that we're gathered here today on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and we're incredibly grateful to be able to use this land for our panel today. I think it's quite fitting that we're using this land for this panel, because one of the core principles of many First Nations peoples is getting to know the other with an attitude of mutual respect and intellectual curiosity. In former Governor-General Adrienne Clarkson's book, The Paradox of Citizenship, she refers to the importance of embracing the other through a First Nations analogy of a circle. And she says, what we understand is that a circle allows everyone to see each other and to lose fear of each other. The other is no longer separate, no longer above or beneath, no longer unknown, but a part of the greater circle. In a circle, we do not have to ask, who is my neighbor? Because our neighbor is right beside us and across from us. And each of us just has to let go of a hand in order to let them in. In a circle, we have to listen to each other's stories. In a circle, we have to meet as persons, and we have to acknowledge that we share a culture or a heritage or even just the land that we are standing on. And we cannot deny to others the right to belong. It is the most profound acknowledgement of our belonging to the human race. So to our panelists, thank you very much for taking the time today to speak with us, and I hope that today helps us all in our collective journey to understand and recognize one another. With that, I think Mr. Anthony is going to say a few words. Thank you.
Good afternoon, friends. Thank you, Rafiq. I was honored to be invited to say a couple of comments today, and then I learned that Rafiq was going to open, and I thought, oh, I don't want to follow Rafiq, because when he speaks so from the heart, it's so honest, it's so genuine, and it's profound enough for us to get on with it. But I do want to take this opportunity to say how proud I am to be a part of this organization and this school for 26 years, due in no small part to the type of people that come here every day and show up. How lucky are we to be a part of such a loving community? This year, our school theme has been one of connection. Connection with each other, in the school, and beyond the school. And never more so than when you watch the news today does it feel like the concept and the theme of connection is even more important than ever. There's nothing that I've ever said at this podium, I think, that may have the impact of what you're going to hear today. When we had an opportunity to have storytelling assemblies in our pre-COVID days, we came together, and a few courageous people among our students and our staff and our parents took the opportunity to take the stage and share a personal experience of their own. And 4 years after that, I'm certain that those of us that had an opportunity to be in those sessions can distinctly remember the personal stories that were shared with us and the impact that we felt from that. And I think there's a beauty in that. We've modified our assemblies to ensure that the students that stand at the podium share something of a personal nature. And I believe deeply in the profound effect that that can have on us as an audience. Thank you for being here as an audience today, as some of our most senior students at the school. And being an audience means that in your body, in your posture, in your eye contact, and in your active listening, you're not only hearing what's being said, but you're wondering how it impacts you, how it affects you, and perhaps what types of questions you may be able to ask when we've saved some time at the end of the session for some Q&A. I'm always proud and impressed on what I hear from our West Point Grey Academy students, and I know that today's panel will feel the same way. To be in the presence of excellence is a real treat, a real joy. And when I say we're in the presence of excellence today, I am not only referring to the accomplishments, professional and personal, of our esteemed panel members, but I'm referring to the type of people that they are, the type of leaders in their communities, the courage that they have to share their stories with us so that we can learn from them and with each other. And with that, please put your hands together again to say thank you to our guests today for what they're going to present to us.
So thank you so very, very much for those wonderful words of introduction. My name's Rabbi Philip Bregman, And very briefly, came to Vancouver a little over 41 years ago. I was born in a godforsaken little town outside of Toronto called Galt, Ontario. It's now called Cambridge. And I was the only Jew in the school. I learned what anti-Semitism was from the end of a fist, from vicious words coming out of mouths. Moved on to Toronto, thank God my family moved there. It was a different type of anti-Semitism, but it was very, very much prevalent. Ultimately, became a rabbi, went back to U of T and did an MSW and so on, and spent a little time in the States. My rabbinical studies was in Jerusalem and in Cincinnati, and my first pulpit was a large suburban congregation outside of New York City in Westchester County called, the town was called New Rochelle. If you're older, you know about the Dick Van Dyke Show. It was from New Rochelle, in any event. And then after 3 years there and having gotten married, the best decision I ever made in my life, my wife was born an American, and I don't hold that against her most times, saw that there was an opening in this place called Vancouver. I'd never been to Vancouver because nothing for a Torontonian existed outside of Toronto. It was a crazy town, Vancouver, a bunch of lunatics, a bunch of pot-smoking hippies. This was back in the 70s. See, nothing's changed.
It's legal now, Rabbi.
That's okay, right. But the hippies or the pot, right. In any event, came out here and became the rabbi of a congregation not too far from here when we first started, Temple Shalom, out on West 10th. January 25th, 1985, my synagogue was firebombed with a Molotov cocktail and destroyed. Thank God it happened in the early hours of the morning. No one was hurt, but the building was basically destroyed. We were able to get out most, but not all, of the sacred scrolls, and ultimately rebuilt on where we are today on Oak and around 57th. I retired in 2013. Thought it was a good time to retire at age 65, but the retirement lasted just a few moments because I was asked to become the executive director and the chaplain of a Jewish student organization called Hillel BC. We're on about 5 or 6 different campuses in the Lower Mainland and out in at UVic as well. There are about 550 Hillels throughout North America. I was supposed to be there for about 6 or 7 months. 8 years later, I retire from Hillel, and that was in May of 2021. And as I'm about to begin now, and I'm 72, the next chapter of my life, I'm concerned about something. I'm concerned about what's going to happen to the relationships that I have been part of and helped to create and been brought into interfaith, intercultural relationships. What's going to happen after those 41 years? And so I put ultimately a proposal together that was accepted by the Jewish Federation of Greater Vancouver. It's an umbrella organization for Jewish organizations, much like the United Way, and a rabbinical association, and I became the interfaith liaison to continue relationships, but there was something else that I wanted to do right from the get-go. I cannot fight anti-Semitism alone. And he can't fight Islamophobia alone. And he can't fight anti-Islam, anti-Indigenous, anti-Sikh, anti-Christian. Unfortunately, one of the members of our panel took ill this morning, Jamira Lovemore, representing a member of the black community, and she sends her tremendous regrets of not being here. We cannot do it alone. We need each other. And so I said, so let me form a team. And most of these people I have worked with for a number of years on different projects. I usually met this lady when I would be going into her constituency office and yelling and screaming about what the government, the Canadian federal government, was not doing properly. I didn't realize at that time that she was wholeheartedly agreeing with me. But anyway, for those of you who don't know, this is the former member of Parliament for my riding and also the former Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada. You're going to hear from each one of the individuals here. Now, there's a certain premise that we have. It's based on something that social scientists called implicit bias. You ever heard of it? A better way of saying this is from a great off-Broadway musical, Avenue Q. You ever heard of Avenue Q with the puppets? There's a great song, Everybody's a Little Bit Racist. So let me ask you, how many of you have been or still are, you think, have a bias? How many of you have a bias, have had a bias? Whoa. Okay, so I, in my counting here, saw about 50%. Houston, we have a problem. Let me ask you another question. How many people have been invested emotionally, financially, or any other way in what's going on in the war in Ukraine? And I'm, as rightly we should. How many of you were in any way, shape, or form invested financially, socially, or any other way with Syrian refugees? You can't see, but there's a big difference between those who said, raised their hand for the Ukrainian refugees and those for the Syrian refugees. And therein lies what I would say is implicit bias. In both instances, there are murderous leaders destroying their own people and others. The numbers are actually quite similar. Right now, there are about 3.9 million Ukrainian refugees, and there are about 3.8 million Syrian refugees. And I'm not saying you should not be supporting the Ukrainians. Absolutely, we should. It's horrific what's going on. But it was just as horrific, and sometimes even more so, when you saw what Assad was doing to his people with poison gas. The first thing in fighting or dealing with bias is recognizing it. Now, some biases, they're okay. I understand people don't like Toronto. I'm from Toronto, and I don't like Toronto. Thank you. Except for the Blue Jays. Okay? Can't stand the Yankees, but love the Blue Jays. Or you're a Canucks fan, and when the other team comes on the ice, you're not necessarily going to clap. In fact, you might boo. Okay. There's a bias there. You understand that? But that's not a hurtful bias. But there are other biases that are tremendously hurtful and dangerous. And so each one of the members of the panel are going to talk for a few minutes. And by the way, thank you for the questions. We received some 60 questions. We're not going to get to all of them. We're not going to get to anywhere near all of them. And so I had to cherry pick. And we're going to leave some time at the end for some open questions as well. So let me start with an individual who I've known the longest on this panel, because Gary and I worked together when he was minister at a couple of different United churches, one in Vancouver, one in Richmond, and is now a retired minister, Reverend Gary Godin. Gary.
Thank you, Rabbi. Am I on? Yes, good. Yes, Philip mentioned I'm a retired minister for 40 years. I worked within a United Church setting. I have lived my whole life as a United Church person, and it came as quite a shock during my training to find out that the United Church of Canada was involved in some very not good stuff over the years of our existence, and we'll say a bit more about that later on. But the whole journey in my professional life as I led a congregation to try to share some of my questions with them, to wonder with them how things could have been different or how they need to change to be different in the future. Yeah, I could ask the questions. Most of the answers I got over time were not particularly positive. They wondered why I was raising questions at all, because my job was to give answers, wasn't it? Anyways, I'm retired now, and I get to ask all the questions I want, and some of them we'll share together.
By the way, one of the things that I forgot to mention is fascinating because you mentioned it in your opening remarks. The name of our group. We're called the Other People because each one of us on this stage at one time or another has been the other person here in Canada. So Gary, you look white and Christian. Well, I don't know if you look Christian, but you certainly look white. I don't know what a Christian looks like. But were you the other person?
Well, I was born and raised in the province of Quebec. I was part of an Anglophone community that didn't speak French. I learned my French in school, and therefore when I spoke it on the street, everybody knew I wasn't French. And I happened to be Protestant in a predominantly, overwhelmingly Catholic Quebec when I was growing up. So there were a lot of people who did not know what to do with me, especially since I look like I look and I have a French name. What am I doing in Quebec? Some of the looks would say. Why do you pretend to be here like you belong here? And then we have a few other stories we can share, but they're not polite.
Okay. And I'm just going to, keeping you before getting on to the next individual, so let's address what clearly is one of the elephants in the room today in Canada. And again, there is a very, very important delegation at the Vatican of Indigenous individuals meeting with the Pope. You alluded to it, the United Church and residential schools.
Oy.
Oh, that answers it.
Yeah, one of the questions I started to hear as I was preparing for ordination in the United Church in the late 70s, as stories started to emerge from survivors of the residential schools, and then the United Church started to do its own work about trying to figure out what the way forward was, apologies, reconciliation, all that. One of the questions I got quite regularly is how are you as an ordained United Church minister going to defend the United Church's involvement in residential schools? And the simple answer, friends, is you can't. If you read and understand the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, this was a government-sanctioned program, residential schools, a government-sanctioned program to destroy the culture of the First Nations peoples. And the United Church bought into it. And we will have to bear that responsibility for generations to come until we've listened enough, heard enough, changed enough to be able to say, please, can we have a full relationship again with our First Nations cousins?
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next individual here. This little guy, he and I have worked throughout the years on a number of different projects. We were actually brought together by the bike lane mayor. Does a name? Never mind. Tarek and I worked together on issues of homelessness in the downtown east side, Syrian refugees, Afghani refugees. Tarek is my beloved Muslim colleague. Take it away.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hello, everyone. I'm really honored to be here. My name is Tarek Tayyab, and I represent a few things, and I wear many hats, but one of them is the BC Muslim Association, which represents over about 100,000 Muslims in the province of British Columbia and about 17 mosques across the province. A bit about me. My background is I've worked in the financial markets for many years, and I'm currently CEO of a tech company called AI Forte. And just on a personal note, my wife and 4 kids that we live not too far from here, a few blocks away, we're all practicing Muslims. And part of my role here is to share the fact that I'm born and raised in Canada, proud to be Canadian, raised in British Columbia, and live here in the city of Vancouver, which I love very much. And part of the work that we're doing for anti-racism, and when I first started regarding Islamophobia, the narrative about mainstream Muslims had been hijacked by extremist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So the general public, and so being born and raised in Canada and understanding Canadian psychology, is that the media kept propagating all this stuff about these extremists, which are a tiny fraction of Muslims worldwide. There's approximately 1.9 billion Muslims in the world today. And these extremists, they could be in the tens of thousands, but nothing more than that. But these extremists, however, the narrative that is perpetuated in Canadian society, which I'll share with you just quickly, is the Canadian view according to Angus Reid, which is a polling organization that conducted this poll some years back. So in Canada, according to this poll, 46% of Canadians have an unfavorable view of the religion of Islam. Less than 50% would find it acceptable for one of their children to marry a Muslim. 56% believe that Islam suppresses women's rights. And if you talk to my wife, she'll say that's categorically not true. She's the equivalent of a PhD. She has a very heavy workload, and she makes a lot of the decisions at home. And less than, 52% feel that Muslims can only be trusted a little or not at all. 42% think discrimination against Muslims is mainly their fault. 47% of Canadians support banning headscarves in public, compared with 30% of Americans. And again, Muslim women, again, they are proud Canadians and they wear hijab of their own choice. Many Muslim women that we'll have in future programs can speak for themselves and why they choose to wear hijab. And lastly, 51%, according to this poll of Canadians, support government surveillance of mosques as compared to 46% of Americans. So why I'm here is to dispel the stereotypes, the negative narratives, and the last fact I want to leave you with, Canada leads all G7 countries, developed countries, in Islamophobic murders. There's been 11 murders in the last 5 years. There was 6 Muslims shot in the back at a mosque in Quebec City, which started the work that we're doing here. A caretaker of a mosque his throat was slit by a neo-Nazi white supremacist a couple of years back, and a family of 4 was run over by another white supremacist in London, Ontario. All of these acts were perpetuated by people that were motivated by white supremacist extremist ideology. So anyways, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
You know, we realized a few years ago that we were meeting not for the wrong purpose, but we were meeting too often because of horrific events, where I would be at the mosque in commemoration of the Quebec City massacre, and Tarek and members of the mosque would come to the Jewish Community Center and up to Hillel in commemoration to the massacre that occurred in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And we said, you know, we've got to stop meeting only at those times. We have to find something else. I mean, and we did find the commonality in terms of what we do. I got a question. What's the most racist thing that's happened to you in your memory?
Well, just recently I was in Kerrisdale, nearby where we go for coffee, and I was just having a coffee outside, and a guy drives by, and he starts...
I'm getting paid for this, so...
And he starts yelling, Allahu Akbar, right? And I was looking at him. Allahu Akbar in Arabic means God is great. And so I guess he was trying to mock me, and he was just kind of pointing his fist at me and going, Allahu, in a mocking way. So I stood up and he took off. So that was a recent event.
You were sitting down at the time. I understand.
And then another, like Muslims have to pray 5 times a day, and so sometimes we're in places where we can't pray in a mosque or somewhere, and so I had to pray in a parking lot of, I think it was a Walmart in Kamloops, and a car drove by, and the guy rolls down the window, and he yells out, "Osama bin Laden!" And so I was like, so again, I thought it was funny, but it was again pointed in a negative stereotype about the Muslim community, about extremists like Osama bin Laden, who are people that, in my view, don't represent the 99.9% of mainstream Muslims.
He also was at that same Tim Hortons wearing something on his head, and the guy started yelling anti-Semitic comments at him. So we're actually going to have T-shirts that have our religion on the back, so that if you're going to say some racist comment, you should at least get it right. Okay? Okay, now this young man to my left, your right, a fascinating individual representing a number of different aspects of our community, a decorated sergeant with the Vancouver Police in charge of diversity, represented of the Asian community, the Buddhist community, and I always say the most important thing in Terry Young's life is his wife, Sarah, who's a council member on City Council in Vancouver. Terry.
Okay, can't really top that from Phil, but I just want to say hi, and I'm happy to be here connecting with everybody here. As I said, my name's Terry Young, and I'm actually an immigrant to this country. I wasn't born here. And when I was a few years younger than you, when I was 12, I actually went to a boarding school in the UK, and grew up, learning how to play cricket and Shakespeare. Not much on my culture, my own personal culture, because English is actually my third language. Not until it was later at university in California that I kind of discovered what I kind of missed out at the beginning. Of course, when you're younger, you want to be accepted, you want to be liked. But I'm going to talk to you about today, a lot of you said, hey, I'm not biased, I'm not racist, I like everybody equally. That may be true, but it might not be the whole picture. I think at the end of the day, I'm hoping we can all think about how we can treat everyone with the same amount and level of dignity as a human being, regardless of your religious or cultural background. Because some of us are treated differently because you're from a different culture or a religious background. I remember when we were in the last high school, some student asked Tarib, how's it like to be a Muslim in Canada? And Tarib said, I'm actually Canadian, I was born here. And I'm going to touch base on it later. The last couple of years in COVID, things have not been kind to the Asian community. I think hate crime has gone up 700%, and these are the reported numbers. Many Asian Americans, Asian Canadian women actually changed the way they go about their daily lives. I had a real close friend of mine, born here, went to Ivy League MBA school, raised millions of dollars for charity, and she told me last year, it's the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she belonged in this country. She's just a foreigner in Canada. So I'd encourage you, as you embark on your educational journey, adventures, go to university, have an exchange of ideas. Think about things you might not be disposed of. Like, things are perfect. We don't need any changes in society. I actually read a journal that said there's no Asian hate crime in BC because there's so many Asians in Vancouver. That is not logical to me. Mm-hmm. But people are going to believe what they want to believe. And I'm hoping today, with your time here, we'll connect and share some of the personal stories because the world is not a perfect place. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Let me ask you one of the questions, and this is a tough one. How can I erase bias from my mind?
That's going to be really difficult. I think we all bias to a certain extent. Some of the people don't like the Blue Jays. They don't like people from Toronto, But at the end of the day, you're going to ask, am I treating other people the way I like to be treated? Do I want to be disregarded, disrespected because I look a different way, I worship a different religion, or my cultural background's different? How would you like to be the out group or the in group? I mean, at boarding school, everybody wants to be admired and accepted. They want to be the prefect, they want to be the life of the party. But what do you have to give up? Do you laugh at jokes that might be demeaning to other people, that you think is funny? Because your words, they do matter. What you say do matter. And I was going to say, Phil was really right. You can't rely on one group. Tariq cannot fight anti-Muslim sentiments by himself. We have to band together and help each other and say this is not acceptable in this country in 2022. Unless you actually stand up and say that and believe in something. When you believe in nothing, you say nothing, you do nothing, then you kind of become part of the problem, not the solution. And I know you're courageous, you're smart, you have a good education. I just want to know when you mature and grow into your places, you get involved in your community like many of us. We serve on governance board, NGO boards to actually make a real difference in people's lives. Instead of saying, you know, we don't have an issue, things are perfect, it doesn't matter to me, I'm okay, I never experienced anything negative, then so negative things just don't happen. That is kind of taking the easy way out. Thank you.
So Terry wears a number of different hats. He's in charge of diversity within the police department and all of those challenges. He is also the chair of Success, which is this fabulous Chinese organization, social service within his community. And he also volunteers in the Jewish community on our security committee. So here's an individual who is not talking the talk, he's actually walking the talk. And now we move to our next contestant, who for me is just a joy and a pleasure, whether I'm having a political argument with her and pointing out how many ways she's wrong, or we're listening and I'm finding out how brilliant this woman really is. Jody Wilson-Raybould.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, and thanks to all the other people up here, and thanks to all of you for being here. And I want to say, yay, West Point Grey. You may know that my 3 nieces went here, and they're all doing well. So it's good to be back here and to be in a space where I know and the school creates safe spaces to have conversations and to ask questions that one might feel uncomfortable asking. And I think for me, one of the great things about being in this group and having such diversity in this group is that we can actually ask those questions of each other and know that in doing so, if we don't ask it in a malicious way, that we'll have real conversations and get to answers. So maybe just to backtrack, and I'm happy to be here. My name is Jody. My traditional name is Puglas. I am proud to be an Indigenous person. I'm proud to be a Canadian. I come from the Muskama, Zawadanic, and Liquica people, part of the Kwakwaka'wakw, which is on the west coast of British Columbia, just off of Quadra Island is where my village is. I liked hearing the openings in terms of talking about the circle and what that means, very much in line with the way I view the world, and certainly thinking about your theme of connection. Again, very much the way that I was raised as an Indigenous person to view the world. I was raised, of course, by my parents and grandparents who taught me the values and principles that I have carried with me through all of the various roles that I've had the great responsibility and opportunity to play. And those values and principles are ones of equity and equality and inclusion, and certainly of achieving justice. Underneath all of that is the reality. I come from a very communitarian culture where everybody in our community has a role to play. And if somebody is inhibited from playing their role, then the community suffers. And I was taught to be proud of who I am and to always remember where I come from and to use my skills and abilities such as they are, and I know you have many skills and abilities, to ultimately improve quality of life for my community and for society. So I carried this through, whether that was being in roles, being regional chief, to being a proud member of parliament, to being a minister of the federal crown in government, And I realized, as an Indigenous person, certainly I don't have to look too far for examples of the challenges that my community faces around racism, marginalization, the revelations that became public around the mass graves in residential schools is certainly something that I think we all need to think deeply about. We never expect as Canadians that our schools would have graveyards. But for me, in all the different roles that I've held, I've realized, one, there is so much tremendous opportunity in this country, but also we still have a long way to go to the place where we can achieve equality and inclusion. And it doesn't matter what table you sit around, whether it's in West Point Grey Academy or whether it's around the cabinet table in Ottawa, the experience of marginalization, of racism based on gendered or racialized terms carries with you. And we need to confront that and contend with it. And one of the reasons why I'm here with these other people, being, well, today the only gal, is I've learned a lot from these people, the reality that we face common experiences of discrimination and racism, and how when we, in safe places, have the conversations, we can break down those barriers. So thank you, Rabbi PB.
So thank you. And so talking about the cabinet, there was a question, what was it like to be an Indigenous woman in the cabinet? And so that's the general question. And do you think it would have been any different if you were an Indigenous man in the cabinet?
That's a good question. Well, one, I mean, like Gary, I'm retired from politics, so sort of right now anyway. But I mean, it's an interesting question because, and I've been asked it many times. I mean, I am just simply by virtue of the time that I was born and the way that I was raised, I'm a person of first, or I mean, I was the first female to sit around an executive table at the Assembly of First Nations. I was the first ever woman elected as an independent member of parliament in the country's history. And I think very importantly, I was the first Indigenous Minister of Justice in our country's history. I was the 51st Minister of Justice. What was it like sitting around the cabinet table? Well, I had a mandate letter, and I joke about this, from the Prime Minister with tasks that I had to do as the Minister of Justice and AG that was longer than I am tall. And I would say within the first 18 months of our mandate, we were able to accomplish a significant amount of the issues that were on my mandate letter. But politics being what it is, and I talk about this a lot in my writing, as elections come, and this doesn't apply to one particular party, it applies to all politicians and all political parties, things become far more political, and people make decisions based on political expediency or make decisions based on what the decisions are most favorable to potentially get them to hold power or to gain power. So some of the issues that aren't necessarily issues that can be resolved within an electoral cycle get pushed aside. For me, having a very different worldview coming into cabinet where there was many people that were very much unlike me and had very different worldviews or were invested in the status quo that Terry talks about, brought me in. And I thought, because of my different worldview and the way I looked at things and how we could resolve issues, but when push came to shove, that worldview and that lived experience and the expertise I had, whether it be on Indigenous rights issues or justice issues, was pushed aside. And that was hugely challenging. And I mean, I think probably people know publicly what happened as how I exited cabinet. I resigned from cabinet on an issue that had fundamentally to do with our democracy and the rule of law. And I've talked about it in terms of my resigning on a matter of principle, i.e. the rule of law and upholding it, recognizing as an Indigenous person that the rule of law was used against me for the entirety of the 150 plus years that our country has been in existence. A bit ironic, but I recognize that we all need to do our part to ensure that wrongdoing doesn't happen and to uphold the fundamental principles of our democracy. And I think, being a first, that was perhaps my place in that time. And I know that there's lots of other things for us all to do and for me to do moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. And we come now to an individual that I have worked with for a number of years. We're both chaplains out at UBC. Indy, Indy Singh is the chaplain for the student Sikh community. And we've worked on a number of programs out there, but most importantly on food insecurity for students. And having talked about food, just to let you know that during these horrendous floods that took place a number of months ago in the middle of the province, the community that really stood up front and center while everybody was running around saying, what do we do, was the Sikh community who hired helicopters, got food into Merritt, into Hope, and Indy was my door whereby the Jewish community was able to then funnel funds that we had collected to the Sikh community for most important food and necessities. Now, I explained to your principal, I chose each of these individuals for different reasons. The reason I chose Indy, he has the best selections of turbans of anybody I know, and that's really why I chose him for our panel.
Thank you, Rabbi, for picking me for my turban, amongst other things, and thank you for your kind words. And how are you today? You guys doing okay? All right. Because I don't like the idea that we speak and you guys just sit and look. And I used to be a teacher at the university, and it's important that you would only care how much we know if you know how much we care, right? So we really care, and thanks, Rafiq, for sharing the metaphor of the circle. That was very touching. I like that, and I was touched to hear that your theme this year is connectivity, which is like Nokia. You guys will relate to that because you guys are media-centric. I'm going to add 3 more C's before I do an introduction. To be racially sensitive, to be culturally sensitive, you also got to be courageous. You got to be brave. It's not easy to stand up when someone is making a joke about someone else. So please be courageous. We need to have creativity to solve our problems because they're not going to be solved otherwise. And you know what? Be a little bit crazy. That helps. Okay? Yeah. You guys are good at that. So be a bit crazy because in this world, in COVID, if you were a little bit crazy, it would help. Don't say that to your parents, but that's basically it, right? Introduction. My name is Inderjeet Singh. Everybody calls me Indy because I was educated in Ohio. Now, most people like me are from India, okay? And I'm not Indian, nor my Native American Indian. I am a 3rd generation Malaysian with an Indian ancestry, for sure. I love my chai and my butter chickens and all that good stuff. As things that you relate to as being Indian, okay? I'm 3rd generation Malaysian. As I said to you, I was educated in a Christian school. Now, Malaysia, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is a Muslim country. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in a Muslim country, educated in a Catholic school. I'm a Lasallian, okay? And I was then to Ohio, to the Bible Belt, to get educated. So I'm now living in Canada, and it's terrible to be a member of a Sikh community in Surrey. If you guys know, right, we've taken over Surrey, for those of you who don't know. We've taken over Surrey, and I call it Amritsar West. I call it, Amritsar is, I call it Amritsar West, and that's where I'm from. But the funny thing is, when I open my mouth and I try to speak my language, because I speak 5 languages, Terry, Punjabi is one of it, right? Punjabi is one of it and is the worst. Because I had to go to school in Malay in Malaysia, That was the national language of Malaysia. Now, so when I speak my language back in Surrey, they don't say it, but I know they're thinking this. What's wrong with this guy? Because I look the part. I have my turban, I have my beard, I'm a practicing Sikh, However, my Punjabi is, as they say, as I learned in Ohio, I can speak it to save my life, so to speak, right? Okay? So I can speak it. It's gotten better, I must say. I'm glad it has. But otherwise, that is my introduction. That is a bit about who I am. So I am a visible minority. I was a minority in Malaysia. So we Sikhs have not come to understand this. We will be discriminated wherever we go, unfortunately. And I stand out like a sore thumb. Tariq, unfortunately, when I was in Ohio, whenever anybody saw me on a Friday evening when they were drunk, I would always be called Abdul, Muhammad, and it was just me because I know there are not many other Muslims on campus. But a lot of the blacks who saw me, they kind of relate and they thought, hey, assalamu alaikum. And luckily, I come from a Muslim country. I would always reply, say, wa alaikum salam. Because I wore a round turban, a round black turban, and I looked like a Muslim gentleman, right? And which is great because my best friends back home were Muslim. I went to Catholic school, my best friends were Chinese, so I understand the pain that Terry in your community is feeling because my brothers, my Lasalian brothers, boys' school, sorry, no girls, Lasalian brothers are Chinese. When their blood boils, when their blood is shed, I feel the pain because they are like family. Okay, so with that said, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.
So, Indy, question here. How has living in Canada or BC affected or changed or influenced your personal, religious, or cultural identity?
I moved here 12 years ago. Okay, only 12 years ago. Luckily, I was educated in Ohio. I understand the North American way of doing things. Both my kids play hockey, ice hockey. When I say hockey back home, they said, "Oh, field hockey?" I said, "No, ice hockey. You got to skate." So we've come to take Canada as our home. I love Canada. I love that flag. That I was so, that I was a little bit upset that it was just being misplaced in this recent protest that we had. How has it, I would say that being a Sikh, if you understand what being a Sikh is, and if that is what I can leave with you today, is to be a Sikh is to wear a turban. To be a Sikh is to wear your kirpan. To be a Sikh is to have this beard on my face. Understand that is what it means to be a Sikh, amongst a lot of other things. So when you see somebody with a turban on their head and a beard on their face, yes, they can be Muslim, they can be African as well, but they're just like you, a little bit crazy just like you, a little bit funny just like you, maybe a little bit depressed just like you. They're very much like you, so keep that in mind. Thank you.
Super. I'm going to ask myself a question that comes from this list. This is a really interesting question. At what point are past wrongs null and void? Well, I guess it depends on what the wrong has been. Because I don't think we can put them all into the same category. I think there are things that happen to us where we need to move on and possibly even, if not forget, then put it into the recess as to why you're carrying that grudge when you were 12 years old or 40 or so on. It depends. But then there are some other wrongs I don't know if they ever become null and void. The story is told of by the great Nazi hunter, Simon Wiesenthal, when meeting a member of the SS, one of the most vicious aspects of the Nazi regime. And this individual was on his deathbed, and he asked Wiesenthal, will you please forgive me for the crimes that I committed? This individual committed murder. And Wiesenthal said, I can't forgive you. The only person who can forgive you is the person or persons whom you murdered. I don't have the right to forgive you for something you did to someone else. Within my tradition, Judaism, murder is the one thing for which there is no earthly forgiveness. Because you can't put the plate back together. You can't simply write a check and it's done with. We will discover in the course of the next number of years, unfortunately, thousands of graves of children buried in our country. Thousands. Is that something that ever should become null and void? Personally, no. I think we need to carry that. I think it has to become part of our gestalt as individuals, our real essence. And the next time we think we have some type of moral superiority over someone else, let's remember. Let's turn to Mother Earth. And let's see who and why was put into her earth. And not forget. Okay, a few more questions. Gary, what's the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation? Great question.
Yes. Anybody else want to grab this one? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Great bunch of colleagues. All right. I'll take a stab at it. This is something that has kind of been on my mind for years, largely because my immediate family has intermarried with other people of other cultures, and it's been a puzzle to know how to incorporate different traditions, different ways of looking at holidays, and it's actually only come to me quite lately. I'm not that smart. I've got a PhD in theology from McGill University, but about basic human stuff, not that bright. Took me a long time to figure out that the difference between appropriation and appreciation has to do with, I think, humble curiosity. I wonder why they're wearing that particular color. I wonder why they've created that kind of art. I wonder why. Well, I wonder if it's even possible for me to ask permission to wear something that's not mine, rather than simply saying, wow, what a cool thing, that would look on my wall. Or what a wonderful thing to add to my wardrobe. No, there's a whole lot of questions that need to be asked of ourselves, and hopefully in relationship with the other who helped create that cultural artifact, whatever it is, to be able to say to them, man, I really am struck by how beautiful that sounds, that looks, that feels. How'd you come up with that? And what's your feeling about other people being a part of its appreciation? That's my best shot.
That's good.
Super. Look, I'm very conscious of time, and I want to save some time to open it up. We did not, what did we get through? Half a dozen, 9 questions out of the 60. I'd like to open it up and see, somebody have a question out there that you would like to ask us before our time comes to an end. Yes?
When does a joke cross the line?
That's a great question. When does a joke cross the line?
Well,
Yeah, go
I can
ahead.
take a quick stab at it. I think at the end of the day, you know, do you mean to do harm to somebody else? I mean, at the expense of somebody else, marginalizing somebody else's culture, choice of food, choice of footwear, whatever it is. Because a joke is more than a joke when it's demeaning to other people. It might be funny to you, doesn't affect you, but it might not be funny to somebody else. So I think at the end of the day, you want to say, did I mean to harm somebody? Is it really? And also, it speaks to the say that some people appear to be invisible. Like their views don't matter. They don't matter as much. They're not in the in group. They're not chosen, right? They're not the prefect, head of the football team. They're not people who aspire to be like. So we like more people. So some people, some of us have a bigger sense of belonging than Indy was saying. Who belongs in this country more than other people? Do we all come from somewhere? I mean, most of us did. Mm-hmm. But we're somewhere along the way, we forgot to read. You don't belong in this country because you look different. So those are the things I think we can ask ourselves. Would I like to be treated this way? Would accord a sense of dignity that I want to be accorded? I think that's a really good place to start. Thanks.
It's a great question. I very much love humor. There are certain jokes that I can tell as a Jew that I don't want somebody else to tell. And the same thing in any community, okay? But I'm going to tell you one. I had surgery a couple of years ago, and my surgeon's waiting, and I'm brought into the OR, and they put me on the operating room, on the table, and then the anesthesiologist said, now, would you please hold out your arms like this? And I said, you know, the last time a Jew did this, it didn't turn out well. You understand? No? Yeah, okay. Well, the surgery got delayed for 10 minutes because everybody had to finish laughing. First of all, they couldn't believe I said it. And then secondly, humor is very, very important. And it's very important within our group. You should see our WhatsApp group. It is the craziest thing in the world, where we can go from the most solemn, disgusting, horrible thing in the world to the craziest thing in the world as well. And it's because we trust one another. What we want you to do today, something in our tradition called panim al panim, face to face. I don't know how many of you are seeing for the first, are hearing from a Sikh, from Indigenous, from a cop, from an Asian Buddhist, a Jew, a Muslim, a Protestant Christian. Once you have a connection with the person, it's different than when you're simply talking in the abstract. But we should not lose our sense of humor. At least that's what I would possibly say to Chris Rock. Anyway, so
I was going to say that.
I know.
Will Smith.
Oh, by the way, I do have a question. You know, it's funny. We were talking about this today, and this is how my mind thinks, which is probably why I should be locked up. But if one of them was white and one of them was black, and the same comment was made, would the assault have taken place on television or not? I'm throwing that out.
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering, and I have no way of knowing what was in Will Smith's mind as he was going up there about to smack Chris Rock. I think he was completely aware that there was a black man hitting another black man. Would he have done it if Chris Rock was Caucasian or a reverse or something? We need to ask uncomfortable questions. We need to ask questions. Mm-hmm. We need to, and without saying, you know, I'm not trying to be offensive, but tell me, is this offensive if I do this or I say that? Yeah. That's how we learn. Because if not, then we're locked in our own bias. Any other questions? I'm conscious of time. Yes, in the back.
As someone who's been in those situations when they're the ones being discriminated against, is it bad for me to be the one to say that sometimes it's not worth it to say something?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last. Did you hear it?
Yeah, it's sometimes not worth it to say something, right? Is that what you're saying? You're subject of
Just let it pass. Anybody? Is it Jody?
Well, I mean, it entirely depends on the situation, and certainly whether you feel safe in that situation. You have to be mindful of your own personal safety. I mean, I always encourage speaking up and speaking up for yourself and speaking out when you see something or you're witnessing something against somebody else. And one of the litmus tests that I have, and maybe this, and I think removing yourself from an unsafe situation, you can go and tell somebody else that it happened and it can be addressed indirectly. But my litmus test, you know, for the interactions and the engagements that I have throughout the course of the day, I look at myself in the mirror every night and I go, am I the person who I was raised to be, and am I carrying the values and the principles that my parents and my grandparents and my ancestors taught me to be? And when I can say yes, and which I do every day, I haven't said no yet, then I'm comfortable that I'm the human being and the person that I was raised to be, recognizing the interconnected nature of the reality that we live in. So yeah, speak up and be proud of who you are. And if you hear something wrong, whether it's directed at you or somebody else, it's our responsibility to do it, in spite of any consequences necessarily that we have faced as a result of doing it.
But there's
And
nothing
just to
wrong.
expand on Jody's answer, it's not so much you, but bystander education is important. If you're a witness to something like this and you really think the person is not comfortable speaking up, by all means, speak up. Because when the rest of us don't say anything, what you're saying is you're condoning that behavior is okay. Right. It's okay to make fun of people who look different. Yeah, I laugh about it because it's funny. So what you're saying is, instead of coming to the aid of something that's important, this is how Indy said, it takes courage. You got to be courageous. You got to sit there, say nothing, laugh about the jokes, because it didn't affect you. So I encourage every single one of you to do your bystander education, your part to speak up when you see something that's not just, to speak up when you think something is demeaning to other people, especially your friends.
Yeah, and all I want to add to that, sorry, is as you are growing up, as you are on this journey towards learning sensitivities, it's okay to not to be brave to speak up while you're young. However, it's got to strike you as uncomfortable. The moment we become desensitized, and that's what a lot of the media is doing to us, right? The moment we start becoming desensitized to comments, pictures, graphics, that's when the damage is done. So if you are thinking about it that, hey, I was offended, I think she was offended, but I don't have the courage or I don't know how to address this, that's fine. Address it with somebody else, right? But however, it's good that you're thinking about it. God bless, yeah.
So, we could certainly go on for hours, and some of us will, be by ourselves. But I want to thank you, and I want to thank the leadership of this school. That when I approached them, and it was actually first through a former counselor of yours that I've known for many years, and I think if he's out there watching, Dave Chevreau, thank you, and putting me in touch again with Stephen and with Jason and Cameron and the entire group. Thank you. Not every school is anxious to have us in for all sorts of reasons. Many are, but some are a little slow off the mark. So I want to end with one of my favorite statements by an 18th century Irish statesman and politician and philosopher by the name of Edmund Burke. And it goes exactly hand in glove with what has been said. All that's necessary for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing.
Amen.
All that's necessary for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. There were plenty of good people during those 150 years of residential schools, but they said nothing. And so things were allowed to continue. Things were allowed to continue in Rwanda, in Biafra, in Nazi Germany. Things were not allowed to continue very long after the invasion of Ukraine. And look what happened. Look what happened when a comedian became president and knew how to command the airwaves better than Mr. Putin. All that's necessary for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. You are good people. You will pick your times and your moments. And we hope we have given you a little insight and courage. Thank you, and God bless you.
One afternoon, a gift walked into my office in the form of Rabbi Brigham. And he said, we've got this forum we want to bring to the school, and we've done it once, we haven't done it before. And then today, very fitting that on literally the first day we have people at school, the world shows up, and we find out the world is actually our neighbors. We're the world. And each of these individual speakers could probably have commanded an entire assembly or filled an auditorium, and we had them all here as a group of superheroes. I feel immensely gifted. I feel it is a gift that you came today. I thought you were the football guy. We've got someone doing a nutrition talk on football. When you walked in, I was like, oh, he's the football guy. I was excited. And I came down, I was like, why is the football guy here? It was really nice to meet all of you. I want to say a few things. The world is increasingly cruel, and I wonder what the antidote is. This school has a very good reputation for sharing stories. Stories are up in flesh. Real life people come in and talk about and share who they are. And you see the trick is, of course, is we all walk around in our own minds with stories about other people. And we pick them up from the media, which is designed to create stories that are sensational. And we pick them up in politics, which are designed to create stories that are divisive. And we walk around with our narratives about other people. So we see you fit in a box for me, and you're this, you're that. But all of us, whether you're represented on stage today or not, people don't know you. And I would say that you all have a right to tell your own story, because there's more than what people see. And I think that was the message that I caught today. I want to thank you for sharing it. I also thought, I didn't see anyone yell, didn't stamp your foot, didn't see anyone make accusations. What I saw was a model for discussing difference about very serious things. And I thank you for demonstrating that today. I thank you for being authentic with our kids. I thought it was fabulous. So a round of applause, please. Did you say you have some things for our speakers?
We do have a few things, and I think there's a couple of students who'd like to stay behind and connect with you one-on-one individually after or as our people talk about.
Okay, what are the